With the recent launch of macOS X Catalina, I thought it might be quite interesting to go back and have a look at the first publicly available version of macOS X. Now, this isn't going to be macOS X 10.0, this is going to be the public beta. Now, the public beta was launched to the public before the actual introduction of proper macOS X to give users a look at what Apple had been doing since they had purchased Next. So, I'm going to insert my macOS X public beta installation CD. Now, one thing I just quickly need to do is change the date and time, because the public beta had an expiration date on it. They didn't want people running this software until the end of time, because it was only $30. So I'm going to change that to 2000. And when we double click on the install macOS X, we get this bizarre contrasting macOS Platinum look with the Aqua look, and the text is anti-aliased, but then we have this Platinum button here. So when we press continue, the machine's going to reboot and boot off the CD. Now whilst it's doing that, I'm going to pull the Ethernet cable out. So immediately we have a very recognisable spinny beach ball, as it's called, or the spinning beach ball as it's called in later versions of macOS X. That was actually brought over from Next. The Smiling Mac logo has been updated. There's a gradient at the bottom and it's slightly different compared to the Smiling Mac logo that boots when you turn the machine on. So here's our first look at Aqua. So here we are at the beginning of the installer. If anybody has used older versions of macOS X, this installer will look quite familiar. What doesn't look very familiar is, however, the Apple logo is in the middle of the screen. There's no Apple menu on this side. So we're going to use English as the main language. Important information about the pre-release, which sort of system requirements. So we're running on a Power Mac G4, need at least 128 megabytes of memory. Back in the day, unfortunately, I couldn't run this because I only had 64. And just some information. Now what's kind of interesting is the fact that this installation has to be done on the first 8 gigabytes of the hard drive. So I've partitioned my drive in such a fashion that I have 3 partitions: the macOS X public beta, which is 4.5 gigabytes, followed by my classic partition, which is about 15 gigabytes, and then my macOS X partition, which is for macOS 10.4. So if you are planning on playing with this, bear in mind that you need to install this on the first 8 gigabytes of your drive. Of course, we're going to read the license and agreement, and we're going to agree to it. So here we'll see the partitions that are available to us. Now, there's my classic partition, there's my Tiger partition, here's my beta partition. We click customize, we can see what options that we can choose. And all of them are required, we can't uncheck any of them. But the maximum installation is 745 megabytes, which if you came from Classic is actually quite huge. I believe a default Classic install was about 250 megabytes, so this is almost 3 times larger. because it's only going to install 750 megabytes or so, the installation doesn't actually take many minutes. I'll speed this video up so you don't have to watch the progress bar in real time. So the installer has finished installing and we're going to do a reboot now. If anybody used Next Step or Open Step, then this will be very familiar. The background colour is straight from Next Step, as is the beach ball icon, which actually is a spinning CD. So upon first boot, we're brought to the setup assistant. So I'm in England. That's better. How do we want to connect to the internet? Well, I've taken away the Ethernet cable, so I'm not going to connect to the internet at the moment. We're in the United Kingdom. The date and time is kind of right. So now it's configuring the system and it will ask us to reboot again. So here we are at the login window. This looks exactly like the login window from Rhapsody. And if you put the wrong password in, you'll get the shake. Or if we log in correctly, we'll be taken to the desktop. Now this is vastly different from any other previous versions of macOS that users are used to. So we have the dock, we have the Finder, there's no mounted drives on the desktop, and then this is a Finder window that allows you to browse the system. So if we choose computer, we'll see our drives there. We have the macOS X installation CD, we can drag that to the trash. At eject. As expected, we put a zip disk in. Where's the zip disk? Well, like many things in the macOS X public beta, zip disks were not supported. We have applications, library, system and users. These folders are what any current macOS X user would be used to. Now the macOS 9 folder, that's used for classic. So home is my current home folder. I have documents, library and public. There's no music, movies or pictures folder. Favorites, I can add aliases to my favorites and I could click here and quickly access them. This takes you to the built-in applications that come with macOS X. Documents, this is a quick link to my documents folder, and then this is a quick link to my home folder. Now the home folder was a new concept for macOS 9 classic users. Because this is a multi-user system, you can log in and have different home directories. You can also have different settings for wallpapers and how you like your dock. That was quite different from macOS 9. So if we have a look at the inspector, we'll see that it's 4.8 gigabytes in size. Available space is 4.1, so the installer has taken probably about 700 megabytes. Let's have a quick look at system preferences, because I think a lot of people will be used to system preferences. So the Apple menu, you can't click on it. all of these pull-down menus here, these look fairly similar. Special menu is no longer there. The sleep and shut down and empty trash have all been moved. So we've got move to trash there, but empty trash, that's actually in the file menu in later versions of macOS X. The Go menu's there. There's not very much in the Go menu. And help, and then we've got our little icon to change between the keyboard layouts. So when we click desktop, we have About This Mac, and this brings us up the About This Mac dialog box. You'll see that we're running the world beta, 512 megabytes of memory, and how many CPUs I have on this machine. We can then go and look at the preferences. So this is, I've always thought, slightly odd. This is a preference just for the dock and the desktop and the disks, whereas the dock and the desktop, where you can set your desktop pictures, they are, in later versions of macOS X, were moved to system preferences. And if we go into system preferences, you'll see there is no option for the dock, which I thought was very odd. Change graphite, and that literally just changes the colour of the icons. There's no wallpaper chooser. Again, that's under the dock and desktop preferences. So they're two separate places you have to go to. In later versions of macOS X, they were all combined. So we can make the dock bigger or smaller. You can't specify which side of the screen you want the dock on, which you can do in later versions. And then we can turn the magnification on, change the size. When you move your mouse over, you get the nice zoom effect. Now, there aren't any icons currently on the desktop, which is a bit bizarre for people coming from macOS 9. You expect to see your hard drive and mounted volumes there. Now, if we make an alias of that, there we are. We can choose the icon size. Now, this was new for people coming from macOS Classic. You could only have icons 32 by 32. In this one, you can have icons 128 by 128. They're anti-alias, they have nice drop shadows to them, they do look very nice. We can snap them to grid so they always appear in a grid. Interestingly enough, the CD shows as removable icons rather than a CD icon. And here, if you're traversing the file system, you can choose to open the new folder in the existing window or in a new window. So if we have multiple windows popping up, which quickly take up lots of screen real estate, whereas now we have this back button, we can go backwards and forwards. So let's set a desktop picture. There's no desktop backgrounds folder, so if we go back to, we press the Go menu and go to Computer, and we go to Classic, Richard's folder, Pictures, Wallpaper. Okay, you can't do drag and drop. There we are, so we have our custom background. So monitors allows us to change the screen resolution, the colour depth, energy saver, when to put the machine into sleep, turns the display off, general, date and time formats, etc, etc, etc. So that's pretty much for the preferences. So what about built-in applications? These are basically all of the applications that came with macOS X. Now you can definitely tell that this came from Next. We have some Next icons, Platinum icons, and then some other icons here. So it's a real mishmash of applications and platforms that it's come from. Calculator. Now until quite recent versions of macOS X, the calculator looked exactly the same. Clock. Now this was interesting because across the menu bar there's no clock on the right hand side, which most people are used to. There's a clock application that you have to launch. Quite how you get it working, I don't know. There we are, showing in the dock down there. Keycaps allows you to use an on-screen keyboard. Mail. I can't show you this unfortunately because this machine has no network connectivity, and the reason why it has no network connectivity is because the auto update for time changes the date, so it will go out onto the internet and go and find a time server, and then if I do a reboot I won't be able to run macOS X because it's 2019 and the beta expired in 2001. So we have Sherlock, which came from macOS 9. Again, you could search the internet for, or search your local disks. Again, we have a mixture of icon styles, so we have platinum icons and then we have these other icons here. Preview, text edit, and this font panel was definitely brought over from Next Step. System preferences is an application, QuickTime Player. Now Apple, in their infinite wisdom, didn't release iTunes with this version of macOS X. So we covered iTunes in a previous video. So in Music Player, this would allow you to play audio CDs as well as MP3s. And you could create playlists. But it wasn't anywhere near as easy to use as iTunes was. So let's add some music. There we are, we have some MP3s. So this is Apple System Profiler. This tells you about the machine. This looks more or less identical to the version that comes with macOS 9. And we have terminal. So Darwin kernel version 1.2, Power Macintosh, Power PC. Console, we can see where the errors are in the system. So you couldn't really do very much with macOS X, and I don't think many people were very impressed with it. Well, macOS X public beta. When version 10.0 came out, it was much, much better. But in its current form, the public beta was a bit of a waste of time. It was interesting to be able to see the Aqua interface, how you had the shadows as you move. If we open another window, you'll see the shadows over the top. Things these days people take for granted, but back in the day were quite revolutionary. This user interface certainly was. So I'm just going to go back to System Preferences, and I'm going to set my startup disk to be macOS 9, but I can't because it keeps quitting. There we go. So I can't actually set my startup disk again. So the only way I can get back into macOS Classic is if I do a restart of the system and press the Alt key or the Option key and choose my Classic partition there. So all in all, it was an interesting look at macOS X, and it was interesting to see where they were moving forward to. But in terms of what you could do with the public beta compared to what you could do in macOS 9, there was no question that macOS 9 had much, much more capability than this early version of macOS X. Also, the Apple logo, this got moved in later versions over here and became clickable. Anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry this has been a bit of a long video. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next one.